Hey everyone, this is Gale from PaulGaleNetwork.com, and thank you for joining me today for video game sales. It is April 14th, 2022, and in today's episode we are going to check out the Famitsu hardware and software charts that tell us what was the week like in Japan, this time from April 4th through April 10th, 2022. To kick things off, we're going to begin with the hardware side of things. The number one best-selling console of the week was the Nintendo Switch, and it moved 61,162 units. Coming in at second was the PlayStation 5, and it sold 11,224 units. Xbox Series came in at third, which did 4,068 units. The Nintendo 3DS came in at fourth, and it did 194 units. And in fifth place was the PlayStation 4, selling 14 units. Nintendo Switch was pretty close to what it did last week, with last week being 67,000. It was a good third less, or more actually, than last year's 96,000. But on the plus side, it's hanging in there pretty well overall in advance of Nintendo Switch Sports coming out later this month. So my belief is that Nintendo might not be necessarily pumping out as many as they could in preparation for a strong weekend and a strong first couple of weeks in May. We'll see though. If the hardware numbers remain similar in that 60 to 70,000 level and are down significantly from last year for those respective weeks, it might take another game to help propel that Nintendo Switch hardware up to be more competitive to 2021's self. But we'll see. PlayStation 5, it was looking a little too good where we had some kind of strong PS5 weeks and we're wondering, could 30,000 be the new base? Probably not. And sure enough, that wasn't the case. It did drop down to 11,000, which is a lot less than the 30,000 from the previous week, 2/3 down or so. A little bit less than last year's 15,000. And overall, it's competing fairly well to last year, 316,000 versus 361,000. It's below, but I imagine that 2022 should be an up year for PlayStation 5. There are some games coming out that, even if they don't particularly cater to the Japanese market that much, stuff like God of War Ragnarok will sell really well worldwide, including in Japan. It is technically also available on PlayStation 4, but I wouldn't be surprised if people want to play it on PS5 and might even buy a PS5 to play it. That's assuming that Sony pumps out enough stock around the time of that game's release. But I do think that PS5 will outsell what it did in 2021 in Japan. As for Nintendo Switch, that'll be interesting. Can it outsell 2021? 2020 remains to be beat. That might be the best year, especially with, stock shortages from a chip manufacturing standpoint. But Nintendo Switch should beat its 2019 self. 2021, that's the one that it's going to be kind of close. We'll see. Xbox Series with 4,068, not too bad of a drop from last week's 4,409, and quite a bit over by 7 times or so. Last year's 571 is looking much better this year with that 44,000 year to date compared to last year's 9,315. 3DS 194, that's down from last week's 305. PS4 technically up, but more or less neck and neck with last week's 12. And yeah, of course, down from last year for PS4 and 3DS. But one other thing I wanted to look at was how close the Nintendo Switch is to beating the Nintendo 3DS all-time life-to-date in Japan. So 3DS is technically still selling, but this is a snail's pace at this point, and that's okay. System did well. It's not a knock on it, but it is at 24.6 million, right? Nintendo Switch right now is at 24.4 million. So there's only 187,000 or so systems in between. At this point, if Nintendo Switch sold another 60,000, it would take just over 3 more weeks to do this. So 4 weeks is pretty much guaranteed. If the Nintendo 3DS was selling like 30,000 or 20,000, it would take more than 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks. But it's not. This number isn't going to be impacted that much more than just a couple of hundred units being added to it. Whereas this number for the Nintendo Switch, 60,000 more is going to bust it up to 465, and then we're going to go to 24.5 million, and then just within another week or so after that, it could do it in 3 weeks. It could do it in 2 weeks. If Nintendo Switch just has a couple of strong weeks ahead, in 2 weeks, they'll beat 3DS. 3 weeks is possible if it's all right, but 4 is a worst case scenario. So that's really nice. We're going to have a new king on this chart. It has its way to go ahead of it to beat the Nintendo DS. That's another beast, but certainly possible. Nintendo Switch just needs a couple more strong years, and honestly, it probably will have a couple of more strong years. It is yet to have a significant, long-term, permanent price drop all around the world for hardware and for software. There is no player's choice line yet. There is no key selection of a dozen or so Nintendo published titles or otherwise games that have this label on them, repackaged at your stores on eShop, only cost $30. Not just a part of a temporary sale or anything like that, a Black Friday deal, but just always marked at 30 or 20. The big titles like Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Splatoon 2. I think that there will come a point where later into the system's life, but this is the latest that it's happened, but later in the system's life, I'm sure it'll have a price drop, and that going for both the hardware and software side of things. So long run, I think Nintendo Switch will pass DS. It's looking more and more likely. Worldwide, I think it will. In Japan alone, I also think it probably will. If we look a little bit on this side, since we could, why not? PS5 physical edition far outsold the digital, 10,000 to 600. Xbox Series S outsold the X, 3,900 to 151. And the Nintendo Switch OLED model led the pack on that side of the thing, with 34,000 versus the base Switch at 16,000 and the Lite at 9,000. Yeah, I don't think Nintendo is giving Japan a ton of Nintendo Switches because they really are trying to distribute it evenly throughout the rest of the world. We got strong reports that Nintendo Switch did extremely well for the month of March in Europe, and the NPD results are going to come out in a couple of weeks in the United States, and that's going to tell us just how well it did in the North American market. So Nintendo, unlike the other two, are giving a lot to US, a lot to Australia, a lot to Europe, a lot to Japan. Not just everyone but Japan. So good chart. Pretty respectable week. Things are kind of looking solid, but I'm ready for a shakeup. I'm ready for, all right, some 100,000 plus weeks for Nintendo Switch. I'm happy that Xbox is hanging in there at that 4,000 level. Hope that continues. We'll see if PS5 could go back up above 25,000. If this is what Sony has done before, this will go down next week, because after that big of a drop, it'll go down again, and it'll be in that like 3,000 range. Xbox got close once or twice to topping PS5. If it continues going down for PS5 and up for Xbox Series X and S, we could have a date where Xbox beat PlayStation in Japan. And that would be a first, which would be kind of entertaining from a historical standpoint, Going on the software side of things, the best-selling game of the week once again was Kirby and the Forgotten Land, this time moving 59,960 copies In second place was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and it sold 16,312 copies. Minecraft on Nintendo Switch in particular sold 9,580 copies. Pokemon Legends Arceus for Nintendo Switch moved 8,548. In fifth was Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and it sold 8,064 copies. The PlayStation 4 version of Elden Ring is the lone PS4 game and non-Nintendo Switch game for that matter on this list. It, in its sixth place, did 6,190 copies sold. Great hold for that game in Japan. In seventh, Mario Party Superstars for Nintendo Switch did 5,534 copies. In eighth place, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. You love seeing it. Nintendo Switch's launch game moved 5,114 copies. In ninth, Ring Fit Adventure did 5,040 copies. And in 10th, Animal Crossing New Horizons for Nintendo Switch sold 4,556 copies. That's a 9-1 split of Nintendo Switch to PlayStation 4 software. And we've got some pretty good holds. Kirby and the Forgotten Land, it's hanging in there at number 1. I believe that it will stay in that position until Nintendo Switch Sports come out. Reports are indicating that pre-orders are very high for Nintendo Switch Sports, so I expect it to have a pretty significant introduction. I'm also curious to see how it will impact hardware. If it does, a lot of people say that there's a little bit of a market saturation, but I don't think that's necessarily entirely the case. Yeah, it is true. I mean, from a factual standpoint, more and more people have a Nintendo Switch now than they did for the prior years. There are only so many more people to buy it, and the types of games coming out, they're selling well, but are they necessarily compelling enough to bring in different people that weren't already going to buy the system anyways to play said familiar games? Nintendo Switch Sports might bring in an audience of a different form of casual that enjoyed Wii and Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort that didn't buy a Nintendo Switch yet. Maybe people that just haven't gotten the console yet for any particular reason, but now that they have more exercise related software in addition to Ring Fit Adventure, something that's more sports related, maybe they're new to it, to the Wii Sports, Nintendo Switch Sports franchise, but just think it looks cool. We'll see. It's going to be exciting. I think it'll do well. Do I think it will do better than Kirby and the Forgotten Land as far as bumping up Nintendo Switch hardware? I'm going to go with yes. And I'm going to go with yes for a couple of reasons. One, because I thought that hardware-wise, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, particularly in Japan, would have bumped up Nintendo Switch hardware a little more than it did. It did something like 83,000 Nintendo Switch systems sold that week, and I thought it would have done 100,000. So, or maybe it was 87, and I thought it would do 100. I was off by 13 or 17,000. Not horrible, but not as good of a prediction as that I would have liked that outcome to be. But I think that Nintendo Switch Sports, provided that Nintendo ship enough Nintendo Switch consoles for that week, I think it will bring in more people to buy a console to play it, perhaps, than Kirby did. But we'll see. Pretty cool seeing Minecraft, Pokemon. We've got some evergreen titles like, Smash Brothers here. One new title really in Elden Ring hanging in. And I think Elden Ring is it. Yeah, Elden Ring and Kirby and the Forgotten Land are the only two fairly new titles. I mean, technically Pokemon Legends Arceus is only 3 months old or so it's on there. But yeah, oldies but goodies on this chart. It looks like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is about to achieve quite a significant number, and that is hitting 2 million physical copies in Japan. So that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that NPD for the US, which will drop soon. And of course, early May 11th, if I'm not mistaken off the top of my head, Nintendo will drop its global financial report for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2021. That'll give us a look at that whole year of theirs and the last quarter of January 1st through March 31st. But yeah, that's going to do it today for Video Game Sales with PGN. Thank you for watching, and yeah, look forward to your feedback in the comments section below. Thank you to Chris1964 from the InstallBaseForum.com forums for nicely putting together this week's hardware and software charts. That's going to do it. See you all later. Hope you have a good one, and yeah, take it easy. Bye.